Okay.
All right. Welcome back.
Okay. Technology can be a little glitchy, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so that was all great information about the sustainability. Those are huge changes recently.
And they're exciting. I think I had mentioned this is it's the 10th year, and it's time to do better work.
Yeah, that's exciting. Let me see my questions. And you're working with a vineyard management company. Is it the same company?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's we've actually been working with the same vineyard management team since 2014. So in one way or the other, it's the same team, and they've brought on a few more people, and we've got a really great working relationship. So
That's great.
I saw part of your question was, how do you feel your management company, if you're using outside source, like contribute to the vineyard practices, or if they make more wine? And I just thought, gosh, they just make it possible.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of in a way, having a larger team and taking a step back from the day-to-day crew management and the operational aspect has really allowed me to take a step back and take the wide view and think about the big picture and how to go about achieving some of these much greater goals than really sometimes. I mean, when you're immersed in it, you're obviously thinking about it, but I know just having the energy and bandwidth to do kind of some of the deep work to get us to where we want to be has been really, it's instrumental. So that's how I feel about our vineyard management company.
That's great. That's great. Let's talk about winemaking style, and then why don't you walk me through the three selections that you have and talk about them. And I'd love to hear how they're different from last year, because these are the same wine that we'd featured in the Slow Wine Guide last year.
Yeah. So my winemaking style, honestly, I don't know how to define my winemaking style. I think I will just leave that to you all. I'm gonna let somebody else decide that. I'm a little too close to it, and I guess the reason I haven't really wanted to say what kind of winemaker I am is that it's a constant learning process. It's a constant evolution. I have a very scientific background. Like I had mentioned, I was a molecular biologist in my previous life. I have a master's degree in ology. That's something that is in my bones. However, almost paradoxically, I am in love with the natural world, and there's something incredibly moving about being a part of a 10,000-year-old art form and craft, and that's just all the romance and almost magic with that. So I'm kind of in two worlds, both with how I feel about viticulture and as winemaking. And so I'm constantly experimenting, and I pretty much anything that interests me that is kind of within a practical reason, I like to try. So I'm at this point, I'm not really set in my ways, and I am just constantly exploring and experimenting, and that's where I'm at right now as a winemaker. So
Nice. Before you describe the wines, I wanted to find out, do you have certain qualities that you're looking for your wines to have in terms of, maybe early drinking or made to age, or, reflect the vintage, or consistently similar flavor profiles from vintage to vintage?
That's easier for me to answer. So one of the things that I've noticed is I am a very aromatically driven winemaker, and for better or for worse. And I think you can really see that with my white wines, which tend to be more open and expressive. Um, with my red wines, they tend to be a little shy on release. We have a fairly kind of tannic, kind of racy site as far as Pinot Noir goes. And sometimes those take a little time really to really give you what they've got. And so that's something that I'm working on through some different winemaking techniques as well as some blending, because I think I want it all. I want my wines to taste great at any stage. I want them to be intriguing and youthful. But I don't, but I also want them to age. And I think what makes things maybe the most difficult is I'm unwilling to sacrifice ageability for wines that are open and expressive. And so I really want it all. Yeah, I've got a challenge in front of me, but that's what I'm going for.
Cool. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, why don't you walk me through your three selections?
Yeah, sure. And so probably the wine that is most unique to Oregon, especially the very cool Eola Amity Hills of Oregon's Willamette Valley, would be our Dolcetto. I don't know. Let's see what you can see. You can see this. Yeah. So this is 100% a state-grown Dolcetto. I planted these vines in the spring of 2012. That was the same year I was married. And so, of course, I remember that. I got the best workout of my life pre-wedding. So anyway, so this went in. We were looking to make a wine that wasn't Pinot Noir. And having a viticultural background, one of the very first things that I was taught how to do was to do a study in site selection, where you learn, you really dive into the attributes of your site and pick what will grow there the best. So my professor was Professor Dry, who had written and has written a number of books on viticulture. And that is, I mean, that's how I remember spending my first semester, was just completely immersed in the process of site selection. And so I used references from Growing Degree Days. I calculated out how much sunshine we could get and really the ripening potential of the site. I landed on Dolcetto because it stood, honestly, the best chance of consistently ripening. We had Tempranillo planted on the site in the mid 90s. And since I started here in 2010 and 2010, 2011, and 2012 were very challenging years for the Tempranillo, and half the time it wouldn't even ripen. And so when it came time to pick another red that was not Pinot Noir, the answer was definitely not Tempranillo. And so I was definitely looking for something different. And I then started tasting some wines. I really wanted to plant Nebbiolo because I love wines from Barolo, if I could afford them all the time. But I just love Nebbiolo. And then I kind of stumbled upon Dolcetto. And so when I started tasting some of the examples out of Italy, I really loved the bright fruit aspects of it. And I just had a gut feeling that it would do well here. The one thing that I did not know is how enormous the clusters would be. So for this Dolcetto, we hand trim the clusters down to the size of a hand. So it's one cluster per shoot, and then that cluster we actually hand trim down. So this naturally sets at about 5 to 5.25 tons per acre, and we bring it down to 2.5, maybe 3 in some vintages. So it does take a significant amount of work. I tried to find dolcetto with smaller clusters, but it doesn't exist as far as what I can obtain here in Oregon. So, and this wine is made, I really like to push the unpinot aspects of it. I love to bring out the juicy blue fruits. We get spice naturally. So what I do is I let it get a little riper. So this will be a higher alcohol than most of our Pinot Noirs, because I really am trying to bring out the essence of what this varietal is like here on our site. The other thing I do is it's fermented, or excuse me, well, it is fermented. Currently, I'm using 100% destemmed fruit for the dolcetto. I really, again, I'm just trying to kind of concentrate the fruit and berry characters. Oh, they're right here. I aged them in hogsheads. There's a 2019 dolcetto. So these are much larger barrels than my standard 228s. And this allows me to have less surface area with the wood so that I get more freshness. And I sneak a little bit into stainless steel. And that just, and it's one of the only reds that I bottle after 9 months. And so everything I do, it's to retain and bring about a more fresh and vibrant blue fruit character of this varietal. And I'm really happy with it. And I think it's done well, and that's why we've planted more. Yeah.
Nice.
So this is our goat channel.
Awesome. Excellent.
Yeah. So I suppose we can go to the Pinot now.
Sure. You're in charge.
Yeah. Okay. So I've selected our estate Pinot Noir.
Okay.
And what can I tell you about this? So the estate Pinot Noir is, as the name would explain, it's 100% estate grown fruit. It really embodies a snapshot of the entire vineyard for that vintage. So we have different vine ages, we have a few different subsoil types, whole different angular vineyard patterns. So what I really try to do is base this blend off of, if it works, each and every block that we have in the vineyard. So you really just get the big picture of how our estate is and how it's developed over time. So, and what makes this different from the previous vintage, there's a little bit more whole cluster. I've really started playing around with whole cluster a lot more. I'm finding a really, really happy place with our upper ridge, especially. It just brings out just a wonderful aromatic lift and kind of takes some of the hard edges off of some of my blocks. And so the 2016 estate has a little bit more whole cluster. And I'm definitely moving more and more towards using native and indigenous yeast for my fermentations. So this is almost exclusively native yeast. There's a little smidge of some commercial yeast in there, but for the most part, as our farming practices become softer, I'm feeling much, much more comfortable using indigenous yeast, or I should say, letting them just do what they do. And in addition to growing, when I was only making 500 cases in a tiny, tiny little facility, I had no room for error. And given I had a very technical background, I felt like I was walking a really tight line. And now as production has increased, I'm making a lot more wines. I have a wonderful opportunity to really start doing more experimentation and taking a few more risks as well. So 2016 is a step in that direction, I would say.
Nice.
Yeah. And then the Chardonnay, because that's the wine you have. I feel left out. I don't.
Oh, you don't have some.
I don't. So you can just lead the way for how it tastes. But I can just
Okay.
I can just tell you a little bit about it. So this
Yeah,
is
please do.
the estate. Yeah, so this is the estate Chardonnay. The main difference, so I always make two different Chardonnays. 2018 started the beginning of our Eola Amity Hills Chardonnay line, and this is the estate. So the Eola Amity, or the Willamette Valley as it was previously known, because we sourced a little bit of fruit from another vineyard, but we're keeping it all estate now. So the main difference is that with the Eola Amity Hills Chardonnay, that wine is going to be bottled the spring following harvest. The estate is always over vintaged, and so there's much more lees. So you get those creamy notes, not the buttery notes, but the more cream kind of nougat almond. And I select barrels that have good tension going into it. And so really I'm looking for barrels that have more density aromatically and also on the palate. So they definitely start off a cut above the barrels that I select for a spring release. And this vintage, most of the vines that were going on to 8 years old. So most of these vines that went into this bottling were planted spring of 2010. Or I should say early summer 2010, because it was the 4th of July weekend, and my grandparents came to visit and they even helped. So these vines are 8 years old. And so I think one of the things that Bryn Mawr as a winery and as a business is we really are a new winery, and we're fortunate to have 4 acres of established vines that were planted in the 90s, but everything else I've established 2010, 2012, and most recently 2019. And so we do have a lot of young vines. And so I think with both the estates, you will see a gaining of persistent depth and complexity as we just get more time. And I kind of feel we've been dry farmed, and right at about year 6 is when I feel like, and some of my colleagues in the area can probably speak to this a little better because I just have one vineyard, but is when the roots really start getting in there. And so I feel like we're getting to that point now where the vines are self-sustaining as far as from a water holding capacity goes. And we're just really now getting into the zone. So, and these, for my Chardonnay, this is fermented and surly aged in puncheon barrels, which are 500 liters. I rarely stir the barrels. Sometimes we stir a little bit during the primary fermentation just to help things finish. But I'm not really in the over oxidative style. Most of my Chardonnay is made in more of a reductive manner. I'm going for the retention of an antioxidant called glutathione. It's great for the human body. It's also a natural antioxidant that helps me have lower sulfur levels. And that's something I always want to create healthful wines as much as possible. And so my motive behind reductive winemaking and white wine is actually kind of chasing this glutathione compound. And I do like the qualities that it gives, and I do like how it also holds on to some of the primary aromas, especially in a bottling like the estate, where I know I'm going to leave it on lees for 16 to 18 months. So how does it taste to you?
It's very elegant.
Yeah.
Sometimes a Chardonnay can just be really kind of overwhelming with all of the flavors, the flavor profile. And I think that this is really, this is elegant. I like that you've got the fruit, the citrus, and there's a little bit of honey in there that I really like. But then you've got that flint and some of that mineral quality to it that just kind of balances it all and keeps it from being, I don't know, I guess overwhelming. That's probably not a good descriptor, but it's lovely, and I can picture drinking this on my patio or, with a meal.
One of the things that I'm finding more and more consistent through my Chardonnay, especially the wines that I take through, these are all full ml, is they take on this beautiful honey note that marries so well with the kind of spiced pear. And although that may maybe kind of sound heavy, I pick these, I'm looking for acid. I'm chasing acid here. So the alcohol on this is really moderate. It's like 12.5, 12.8, yeah, 12.7. And so you have that lightness and you have that verve. So in a way, I can't say I really tasted anyone else's wines that are like mine, because aromatically, I find it very like lightly spiced, kind of like poached pear. And so maybe you think it's going to be really heavy on the palate. And although the attack is soft, there's still life, vibrancy, and verve. And I really like that. And I think that moving forward, these wines are just going to continue to have more palate weight to them without ever being clumsy and heavy. And I'm really looking forward to these vines getting older and older and older and being able to have those great flavors translate all the way through the palate. And that only comes with vine age. And and we're getting there, especially with the no-till farming, and of course being not own rooted, but of course being dry farmed and going through with a whole new approach to nutrition. I'm really looking forward to bringing out the best in these vines and just achieving some really, really great things, because I know our site is very unique and special. It's so windy and so extreme that these wines have such a strong character to them, whether or not it's tension or acidity or some years even vibrancy and depth. Whatever they are, they're always very, very, they have a lot to say. And my job is, of course, the winemaker and also the vineyard director, is to make sure that I bring about the best in their personalities. So that's where I'm coming from with these wines.
Nice. I think that you definitely have.
Thank you.
All right. Those were all the questions on my list. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Flowering happened really fast this year. We went from 0 to 100% in like 3 days. This morning, I spent the whole morning out in the vineyard, and on Friday we were at like 5%, and now we're 100. One thing that's interesting about this vintage is I found that the flowers are so floral. Our West Chardonnay block, our Chardonnay, it's clone 95, and a lot of that goes into our estate bottling. the actual flowers in the grapes were just so aromatic and so floral, and I'm trying to be a little bit guarded, but I just have a really great feeling about this vintage, and the just because the flowers have been so aromatic. So I hope the rest of the vintage holds up. It can stop raining now. It's okay if it rains a little bit end of June, a little bit here in July, and a nice little rain before harvest, and then we'll be ready to go. But it's been a rainy start. But the consistency in flowering is always a really it makes me sleep at night. So that's great. So I feel good that we're almost through flowering, and now I can actually throw a dart at the calendar and know generally kind of when we're going to start harvest. So yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. I think we've covered most of all your questions, and I've got
Wonderful.
out all the things I wanted to say. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really great talking with you. And I look forward to tasting the 2020 vintage.
Thank you. They're going to be great.
Oh, I'm sure. Okay. Thank you,
Right.
Rachel.
All right. Thank you.